Thank you for watching this video on responding to disclosures of sexual abuse. My name is Nicole and I work for Just Detention International. Just Detention International, or JDI, is a health and human rights organization that seeks to end sexual abuse in all forms of detention. We work with corrections officials, rape crisis advocates, and policymakers to make detention facilities safer. In this video, we will discuss trauma and sexual abuse. Some of this may be difficult to hear. If you have concerns, please seek guidance from your supervisor before watching this training video. As you know, it can be incredibly difficult for a person who has experienced sexual abuse to seek help, and many survivors of this violence never make a report. For incarcerated survivors, being in a closed setting where it may be impossible to get away from their perpetrator only adds to the trauma of their ordeal. Despite the efforts of corrections agencies across the country to put in place effective reporting mechanisms, train their staff, and educate people in their custody about how to report, we know that people in custody who experience sexual abuse often struggle with the question of whether to report sexual abuse, and if so, what the best way to seek help will be. We know that how the first person someone discloses sexual abuse to responds can have a huge impact on that person's healing. That is true in the outside community as well as in detention settings. In this video, we will talk about how to respond to reports of sexual abuse and sexual harassment with professionals. We know that before we continue, let's review the learning objectives for this brief training. My goal is to help you understand the way staff respond to reports of sexual abuse contributes to the facility's culture and perceptions of safety, and review some best practices and share examples of how to respond to disclosures of sexual abuse in a professional and compassionate way. To be clear, today's video is not focused on protocols around PREA reports such as first responder duties or investigations, but on your own response to an individual who reports sexual abuse or sexual harassment to you. As you know, there are multiple ways for people to report sexual abuse or harassment in your facility, and the intention behind that is for people to be able to report in a way that feels safe to them. Reporting options typically include in writing via grievance or official facility form, or on a piece of paper, through a third party, such as a family member or a friend, to an outside agency that the facility has an agreement with to receive reports, and most importantly for this topic today, people can report sexual abuse or harassment by simply telling any staff, contractor, or volunteer at their facility. Nevertheless, the U.S. Department of Justice found that the fear of retaliation by staff or other incarcerated people, concern that staff will automatically place them in restrictive housing, and the prospect of being mocked or treated dismissively deter many incarcerated survivors from reporting. Others, particularly those who experience sexual abuse earlier in life, may not believe that staff will help them or may not feel that they are entitled to protection, especially if they were abused as children. As I mentioned, the first person a victim talks to about their abuse can have a significant impact on their overall healing. For incarcerated people, that first person is often facility staff like yourselves. Given all of the obstacles to reporting I mentioned previously, if someone does disclose sexual abuse or harassment to you, remember that in that moment, this person is trusting you to help them, and it is your duty to take the needed steps to ensure their safety and well-being. Responding to sexual abuse disclosures in a professional and respectful way is not only positive for the victim, but for the facility's overall culture. When people in custody see that staff take their safety and their reports seriously and provide incarcerated survivors with the care and support they need, it creates an environment where potential perpetrators are less likely to abuse people and other victims are more likely to report abuse, which benefits everyone at the facility. And while the focus of this video is on how you respond to disclosures of sexual abuse, the communication recommendations I'll be sharing can be helpful in many situations. The bottom line is that interacting with incarcerated people with respect and compassion makes your job easier. With that, let's review some best practices for responding to disclosures of sexual abuse. Staying calm and professional are critical when responding to disclosures of sexual abuse. Obviously, you'd never want to laugh or make a joke, but also keep in mind that acting shocked, sad, or disgusted is also not helpful. Keeping your composure and focusing on the person are the most important things to remember. Here are some tips for doing that. Always remember that you are not responsible for determining whether what a person is saying is true or not. That will be the investigator's job to figure out. So, it's important to put aside any preconceived notions you may have about this person or their criminal and institutional records. Stay focused and present. If you're not able to do that in the moment for security reasons, make sure you let the person know. This does not mean you should brush them off or make them wait a prolonged period of time. A disclosure of sexual abuse is an urgent matter. But you can say, "Let me get someone to cover the unit so that we can talk," or "Let me call for backup." Acknowledge that you understood and are going to take what they shared seriously. While it can be nerve-wracking and uncomfortable to hear about something as terrible as sexual assault happening in your facility, it is much more difficult for the victim who's making the report. They are likely very worried about what will happen next, and again, your response has deep implications for their healing. Let them know that you understand and are going to take what they have shared seriously. For example, you can say, "Thank you for trusting me with this information," or "Okay, I understand and I will help you." Prioritize listening over asking questions. Remember, your role is not to determine what happened, that is for the investigators. So don't ask questions or ask the person to repeat part of their story. Questions following an assault can trigger victims, and having to share repeatedly about the abuse can be re-traumatizing. Instead, you can reflect back on what you are hearing to let them know that you are paying attention and understanding. Say things like, "I understand you were assaulted and are feeling scared and would like to make a report." Also, while you should not ask specific questions or seek more details, you should never interrupt or cut off a victim that is disclosing abuse. Something else you can do is offer support and validation. Of course, you're not a counselor or a therapist, but a simple statement like, "I'm sorry that happened to you," or "No one deserves to go through that," can show that you care. Next, you'll want to be clear about what you're required to do and what will happen. For example, you can say, "I'm required to notify my supervisor now so that you can get help that you need and or so that we can protect you." Or, "I need to take you to medical so that they can check you out and talk to you about your options for care." Or, "Emotional support is available and I can remind you how to access those services." Lastly, don't forget your body language. Be mindful of your posture and your movements. Are you presenting as receptive and caring or as standoffish and skeptical? You should maintain eye contact and focus on the person talking to you. For example, nodding is a good sign that you're listening. You should avoid facial expressions of shock, discomfort, disbelief, or anger. To wrap up, both verbal and physical language matters. Survivors of sexual abuse are used to hearing things like, "Why didn't you do this?" or "You should have done that." "I'll investigate this, but it probably won't go anywhere." "I can't talk to you about this," or "Sounds like you should request to see psych." "If you don't tell me everything, I can't help you." Instead, here are some additional statements for your toolbox that will work better when receiving a report. It's never okay for someone to violate you. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. You did nothing wrong. The assault was not your fault. Thank you for telling me about this. Nobody deserves to be treated that way. We have a zero tolerance policy here. It can be stressful to have an individual tell you they've been raped. It's hard to know how to respond. So much of your training is around facility security. So when something unexpected arises, such as learning firsthand that a person in your custody has been sexually abused, it can feel particularly uncomfortable. But think about how you'd like for a loved one to be treated if they had been sexually abused. A person's current incarceration status does not mean they don't deserve compassion and support. Survivors often feel guilt and shame already, without others responding negatively to their experience. It is your responsibility to ensure your response does not contribute to a survivor believing that the facility will ignore the report, that what happened to them was their fault, that they were asking for it, or that they could have done X, Y, or Z to prevent the assault. Thank you for your attention during this video. For further information and resources, please visit JDI at justdetention.org.